In 2001, the Carolina Panthers were trying to improve after a mediocre 7-9 season in 2000. Their head coach George Seifert was in his third year, and they had a new rookie quarterback, Chris Wenke, who they had drafted in the 4th round. Things got off to a great start. In Week 1, the Panthers got a 24-13 win on the road against the Minnesota Vikings in Wenke's first start at quarterback. But it only went downhill from there. The Panthers lost every single game for the rest of the season, finishing at 1-15. 2 of their games went into overtime, including one against the 12-4 49ers, but they would unfortunately drop them both. Things could have been much better though. The Panthers finished +1 in turnovers and lost 9 one-possession games that year. Must have been a really frustrating season as a fan. Wenke would finish with 11 touchdowns and 19 interceptions. Following the season, Seifert would be fired, and the Panthers hired John Fox to take over. He ended up doing a great job. Just 2 seasons later, in 2003, the Panthers ended up making it to the Super Bowl, but lost to the New England Patriots. The 1990 New England Patriots had a terrible season. The head coach was Rod Rust, who was in his first season. Unfortunately, it would also be his last. During the season, the Patriots won their second game, but lost every other one. They ended at 1-15 and never scored more than 24 points in a single game. 3 different quarterbacks started games for them. Mark Wilson and Todd Hodgson started 6 each, and Steve Grogan started 4. These 3 combined to pass for 14 touchdowns and 20 interceptions. As a team, the Patriots lost 36 turnovers, while their opponents lost 32. Overall, the year was a disaster. The Patriots continued to struggle until 1993, when they hired Bill Parcells and drafted quarterback Drew Bledsoe. In 1981, the Baltimore Colts were hoping to improve their previous season of 7-9. Their coach Mike McCormick was in his second year. This team actually won 2 games, going 2-14. However, both of their wins came against the New England Patriots, who also went 2-14. Every other game was a loss, and some of them were pretty ugly. Their defense was especially bad, setting records at the time for points allowed. The fewest points that the Colts allowed to an opponent all season was 21, and they allowed 30 or more points 10 different times. Meanwhile, they never even scored 30 points as a team once. The quarterback was Burt Jones, who passed for 21 touchdowns and 20 interceptions. McCormick was fired, but the next season, the Colts started out 0-8-1 until the rest of the season was canceled due to a strike. And after the 1983 season, the Colts would end up moving from Baltimore to Indianapolis. Just 10 years later, in 1991, the Colts had another really bad team. This time, playing in Indianapolis, they went 1-15 and were the worst team in the NFL. Ron Mayer was in his 5th season as coach and ended up getting fired after. As a team, the Colts only scored 20 points or more twice, with the high being 28. The game where they scored 28 was also their only win of the season, which came against the Jets. 11 times during the season, the Colts were held to under 10 points. As an offense, they only scored 13 touchdowns the entire year. Jeff George was the starting quarterback, starting every single game and passing for 10 touchdowns and 12 interceptions. The leading rusher was Eric Dickerson with 536 yards. Their defense ended up improving, and the team turned things around quickly, going 9-7 the next year. The 2009 St. Louis Rams were the worst team in the NFL that year, going 1-15. Their only win was against the 2-14 Detroit Lions in Week 8. The most points they scored in a game all season was 23, and they only scored above 20 2 times. Coach Steve Spagnuolo was in his first season as head coach, and the team went through 3 quarterbacks. Mark Bulger started 8 games, and Kyle Boller and Keith Null each started 4. These 3 combined for just 11 touchdowns and 21 interceptions. Not very good. The turnover differential for the team was -13, and at the end of the year, they had the first overall pick. That pick was used for Sam Bradford, which helped improve the team to 7-9 the next year. The next terrible team is the 1980 New Orleans Saints. They started out with Dick Nolan as coach, who would get fired after Week 12. The team did not win a single game until the right before last game of the season, when they won by 1 point over the 4-12 Jets. The defense was not very good, giving up 30 or more points 8 different times. Archie Manning was the quarterback and started every single game. He finished with 23 touchdowns and 20 interceptions. Not that good, but also not that horrible at all. And after the season, Bum Phillips was hired as the new head coach. Unfortunately for the Saints, it wouldn't be until 1987 that they finished over 500 when they went 12-3 with Jim Mora. In 1972, the Houston Oilers finished the season 1-13 under first-year head coach Bill Peterson. After that terrible year, they were hoping to improve in 1973, but they did not. In fact, things went even worse. They finished 1973 with a record of 1-13, just like the year before. Bill Peterson was fired after just 5 winless games, and Sid Gilman took over. They got their first win in Week 8 in a 31-28 victory against the Colts. This Oilers team was another team that had a terrible defense. 9 out of their 14 games, they allowed 30 points or more, and their offense wasn't much better. They turned the ball over an insane 52 times that season, and their turnover differential was -25. Dan Pastorini started 10 games at quarterback, with 5 touchdowns and 17 picks. Lynn Dickey started 4 games, passing for 6 touchdowns and 10 picks. The next season they improved though, going 7-7 with Sid Gilman. But the season after that, they hired Bum Phillips and really improved, going 10-4. The 2017 Cleveland Browns failed to win a game all season and ended at 0-16. They were a terrible -28 in turnover differential. Everything about the team was bad, but somehow they played in 6 one-possession games. They even went into overtime twice, but obviously lost them both. Hugh Jackson was the head coach in his second season and kept his job after the winless year. Deshaun Kaiser started all but 1 game at quarterback. His numbers were less than impressive, with 11 touchdown passes and 22 interceptions. Kevin Hogan and Cody Kessler also played at quarterback, but didn't do much better at all. The defense got just 13 turnovers all year, but at least the Browns' offense never got shut out. The most points they scored in a single game all season was 28. After the season, they had some high draft picks, which they used on players like Baker Mayfield and Nick Chubb. Things ended up turning around in Cleveland eventually. The 2008 Detroit Lions finished the season at 0-16 and became one of the few teams in NFL history with a winless year. They did have 5 one-possession games, but unfortunately lost them all. 2 of these one-possession games were against the 10-6 Minnesota Vikings, where the Lions led them both going into the 4th quarter. However, they would end up losing them both. They finished the season -9 in turnover differential, and as a team, they passed for 18 touchdowns and 19 interceptions. Throughout the year, the team used 5 quarterbacks, 3 of which started games. Those were Dan Orlovsky, who had 8 touchdowns and 8 interceptions, John Kitna with 5 touchdowns and 5 interceptions, and Dante Culpepper, who had 4 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. One bright spot in the season was that they did not get shut out. There was no question the Lions were the worst team in the NFL that year. They had only been 7-9 the previous season. Rod Marinelli was the head coach, and he ended up getting fired. For the Lions, the good news was that they had the first overall pick in the draft, which they used to get Matthew Stafford. Finally, the worst team of all time would be the 1976 Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This was their first ever season in the National Football League. The Seattle Seahawks were also new that season, and both teams got their players from an expansion draft. In the draft, the Buccaneers and Seahawks could pick players off other NFL teams' rosters, but the other teams were allowed to protect up to 29 players from it. Because of this, the 2 teams had many cast-offs on them, and they both struggled. The Seahawks finished their first season 2-12, but the Buccaneers were even worse. They ended up going 0-14 and not winning a single game. During that miserable year, the closest they came to winning was a 13-10 loss against the Seattle Seahawks. Another close game they had was a 14-9 loss against the 2-12 Buffalo Bills. Their worst loss of the season was 42-0 to the Steelers. They ended up getting shut out 5 times out of their 14 games, including their first 2 of the season. Steve Spurrier was the starting quarterback for that year, which was also his final season in the NFL. He started 12 games, passing for 7 touchdowns and throwing 12 picks. A few other quarterbacks played as well though, and as a team they had 9 touchdowns and 20 interceptions. Their leading rusher was Lewis Carter, who had 521 yards and 1 touchdown. As a team, the most points they scored in a single game all year was just 20. Overall, the team really struggled, and their head coach John McKay got very frustrated. He had been brought in to coach after having success at the college level. McKay had a 5-year plan to turn things around, but the first year was about as bad as it could be. When he was asked about the execution of his offensive line after a game, he said he would be all for it. Things got better eventually, though, in Tampa. The next season, they went 2-12, and by John McKay's 4th season, they went 10-6 and won their division. That's all for today's video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.